Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Everybody is focused on D.C. and the Trump administration, but don't forget how important our state government is and how important the governor is as a key player in state government. In 2026, Tennessee will elect a new governor. I think it's safe to say most conservatives in Tennessee do not want another Bill Lee or Bill Haslam. So far, only one Republican, U.S. Rep. John Rose, has thrown his hat in the ring, and we're glad to have him with us tonight. Just a short bio for those of you who may not be familiar with him. Congressman John Rose is an eighth-generation Tennessean and farmer. He took office in 2019 as a conservative outsider and has been endorsed by President Trump in every campaign to represent the 6th Congressional District of Tennessee. He is a Christian conservative who believes we have a moral responsibility to reduce the national debt and leave America better for the next generation. He was raised in Cookeville and is a graduate of Tennessee Tech University, Purdue University, and Vanderbilt Law School. He is president and owner of Boston Software, LLC, a small business based in Nashville. He's an active volunteer and supporter of the Tennessee Future Farmers of America and has served as chairman of the Tennessee State Fair Association for over 10 years. John and his wife of 14 years, Chelsea, and two sons, Guy and Sam, live in Lancaster, a small community in Smith County, which was settled by his ancestors in 1790. Well, hey, thank you for joining us today. I know it's real busy on the Hill, so I do appreciate you taking the time to be here. How are you doing tonight?
Very good, Dave. Thank you for having me on the Tennessee Informer tonight. And, it's been an interesting week, interesting day as, we were working to try to get that one big, beautiful bill, whipped into shape to deliver for the American people on the promises that President Trump made as a candidate and as we made as candidates supporting his agenda for restoring the greatness of America.
Absolutely. And right now, I would say it's a butt ugly bill, but hopefully when it's all said and done, it'll be a big, beautiful bill. I know you're here to talk about the governor's race, and that is the main focus, but, given what's going on in D.C., got a couple of questions. And so let's talk about Trump's big, beautiful bill and where we're at. I think you maybe made a little Twitter announcement a while ago in reference to this bill.
Yeah, so I announced a little earlier that in its current form, I'm opposed to the bill. There is, a lot of good things in the bill, so I don't want to characterize it as a complete catastrophe. I think more good than bad, but I think we're missing the moment. We're missing the opportunity. We all know this is it's probably too much to say once in a lifetime, but certainly once in my career in Congress, this is kind of a one-shot deal to get this right and deliver for the president, deliver for the American people, deliver for conservatives, and frankly, deliver for my kids and your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. We've got to turn this country around. We are spending way too much money, and if we don't get it right here, then, it's going to be hard to be hopeful going forward.
Yeah. And that's your biggest concern is the amount we're spending, and I'm sure some of the things we're spending it on, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I think, if I was looking at the big picture with respect to the reconciliation bill, obviously the goals here are to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act tax cuts from 2017 and hopefully make as many of them permanent as possible. You might say, why start there? Because if we don't, then most Americans would see a 22 to 26% tax increase, some much more, some a little less. Next January 1st. And so it would be the largest tax increase in American history, frankly, would be stifling to the economy. And it would be more money coming to Washington instead of in Americans' pockets. And that would be, I think, devastating for the country. And it would also set the stage for more reckless spending in Washington. So we've got to get that first. Second, we've got to make some real cuts. The budget resolution that the House passed and the Senate passed one that was not quite as acceptable, but ours called for a minimum of $1.5 trillion in cuts over 10 years. The problem in the current legislation is that too much of the cutting, the actual cutting, comes in the late years of that 10-year period. And we all know from watching Washington that if you don't get it early, then you might not ever get it at all. And so a promise made by a Congress now about what's going to happen 5 years from now, you can't bank on that. And the American people shouldn't be happy or satisfied by that. And I'm not. And that's really probably the thing that really frustrates me most about this. And then finally getting, kind of digging a little bit more into the specifics there. We have got to get some of these federal programs under control, Medicaid in specific, where there is so much waste, fraud, and abuse. And that abuse I would put in the form or represent it to be, we've got too many able-bodied Americans who are on the sidelines and not working, and yet getting benefits like Medicaid. And so there's a work requirement that we've been talking a lot about. It's in this bill. Unfortunately, as it stands currently, that work requirement wouldn't take effect until 2029, for goodness sakes. And so that's not credible. We've got to do better than that. There are a variety of other issues, particularly around Medicaid, where I think we can do better. We have this expansion population, what we call Obamacare, where 40 of the 50 states are getting reimbursed at 90%. So, and these are folks who in many cases are probably the least deserving to receive Medicaid, and yet they're getting the reimbursement rate for those states that did this. It was kind of a bribe to get Obamacare into action. And so Tennessee, thankfully, the leaders in Tennessee, I think, made the right choice and have made it over and over again to stay out of that. But we've got to get that right at the federal level. And then maybe the most perverse thing that we see there is states like California that have put illegals on Medicaid. Yep. And ostensibly they say they pay for it, but the truth is the American taxpayer is picking up part of the tab there. And then the final thing that I would point out is the current legislation increases the deductibility of state and local taxes. And that's probably something that Tennesseans don't spend a lot of time thinking about. But these high tax states, particularly New York and California, where we know they're putting in place woke policies that are really counter to what we should be doing in this country. And you and I, as Tennesseans, will be picking up the tab for the insanity in New York and California if the SALT deduction is raised in the way that's being proposed and demanded, sadly, by some of my Republican colleagues who want to deliver, bring home the bacon for their home state constituents. But it's bad policy for America to encourage the bad policies that we see in these liberal states.
So we would be subsidizing that is essentially what we would be doing.
Absolutely. That's exactly what happens. All of us in low tax states where we do it right, places like Tennessee, we'd be subsidizing New York and California.
Yeah. Now you said the word specific a few minutes ago in reference to something, and that's another question. It's an 1,100-page bill. How is it even finished being written, and how can you know the specifics of it? I mean, nobody can read an 1,100-page bill that quick and have a clue what's in it.
Well, I would say here it's a little better than the norm in Washington because we have been, we had the budget resolution, which was the framework for what we're doing here that we passed a few weeks ago. So the top line objectives were laid out pretty clearly. But then the markup, if you will, or the writing of this bill has been happening in a fairly methodical and transparent way in the various committees that that have jurisdiction over areas. The problem is that as some of those committees, I think, delivered magnificently on the promises. I think about Judiciary, led by Jim Jordan, that came in well ahead of where they were supposed to. The committees I serve on, Financial Services and Agriculture, we delivered more than we were called on to deliver. And I think while those bills are not, those elements of the bill are not perfect, they're pretty good. So we've been able to see that and have more time to digest it. Where I think the trouble comes is that particularly Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means, and I think they were working to try to get it right, but I think they fell short of getting the specifics like we need them to be. And so now there's a lot of horse trading going on, to try and get those bills, those elements of the One Big Beautiful Bill right. And I think the president said it well yesterday. He spoke to our conference and he said, let's focus on waste, fraud, and abuse. We know the American people will support us in those efforts. We're not trying to pull the rug out from anyone, but we do need to get Americans off the sidelines that are sitting on the sidelines and receiving benefits, but aren't being required to contribute to the greatness of America. And I think the president is for that, and I think we can get that right. We've just got to kind of hold the line here and make sure that we get those provisions as close to right as we can. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Dave, you and I were talking about this before the program. We just can't miss the moment here. And at least I know in my time that I'm going to be in Congress, this is the chance to get it as far down the field as we can, to move the ball as far down the field as we can. We got to make sure we take maximum advantage of this opportunity.
And you think there could possibly be a vote as early as tomorrow?
We've been on notice all day. So, if they think they're at a deal where they think they have the votes, we could be noticed on that. And Speaker Johnson has shown a lot of nerve when it comes to calling these votes when it doesn't appear clear that he's got the votes. I think here he probably knows he's still got some work to do, that we all still have to roll up our sleeves, and I've got my sleeves rolled up. I'm ready to work.
Okay, well, I'm going to transition to another topic before we get into the governor specific. But I am glad to hear that you're a no at this point, because I think it needs a lot of improvement before it should be supported. President Trump is getting blocked at every turn on deporting these illegals by the courts, whether you're talking federal courts or to some degree the Supreme Court. And I know you're a lawyer. At what point, if any, in your opinion, should Trump ignore the courts, including the Supreme Court, on this issue of deporting the illegals?
Well, the way you've asked that question. It's a tough question, because obviously we have a system where the court has its role, and we have this separation of powers, and it's it has been well accepted for some time that it's the province of the court to decide, to make determinations in cases and controversies that come before the court about whether how the law is applied, whether it's constitutional and that sort of thing. But what we have seen happen over really the last 20 years, but particularly during the Trump administration, we have seen the vast expansion of the use of federal district courts, the local courts in each state. So the Middle District of Tennessee, and I probably shouldn't pick on them because they're certainly not the crux of the problem. But we've seen too many district court judges who are expanding their power and issuing these nationwide, some people call them universal injunctions. That didn't happen with any degree of regularity 20 years ago. And certainly when I was in law school years ago, I think it had only happened once or twice ever where a federal district court would try to extend an injunction that went beyond the parties to the case and tried to enjoin behavior beyond the district that particular district court judge has jurisdiction over. Unfortunately, we've seen this used against President Trump. Admittedly, not just him. So it's been used by some other courts over the last many years. And I think we see it's really gotten epidemic at this point. And I think we saw the case recently over birthright citizenship. I feel very strongly that the interpretation that's been in existence for some time is wrong-headed. I think that's been misread. I think the 14th Amendment was never intended to award citizenship purely on the basis for whether or not you were born in this country. That was not what was intended. And so we've seen real abuse of that. And I hope the court will get that right. But they're also I think we will see them address this question of nationwide injunctions as a part of the decision that they make in that particular case. And I hope that they will rein in the federal district courts. And I think the Supreme Court, frankly, would be doing themselves a favor, because otherwise, they're going to continue to be bombarded with these appeals of cases coming up from the district courts on an emergency basis. And frankly, as we've all seen, and particularly conservatives, this is a pretty transparent attempt by liberals and woke judges that were put on the bench by President Biden and other Democrat presidents that are really subverting the will of the American people. We elected President Trump to make these decisions, and when the courts step in and they put in place one of these injunctions, and frankly, they're just trying to run the clock out. And if the court doesn't act, I think that's the impact that ends up happening, and it subverts the will of the people, and really is then counter to democracy, to the democratic process that undergirds our republic.
Yeah. Well, and I know I may be a minority on this, but I think that, and I got to put this out here. I know earlier you didn't say it, but you referenced the Marbury opinion, but that's not what our Constitution did not give them the power. They have to rely on the executive to enforce their opinions. And if the executive says, well, my interpretation and understanding of the Constitution is X, there's nothing that the court can really do. They don't really have the power. They only have the power, their only constitutional powers, is what they have in terms of original jurisdiction. All the rest of their power comes from whatever Congress gives them in the different judiciary acts. And that's another thing. I know that you wouldn't be able to do this as governor per se, but while you're in the House, that's something the court needs to really be reined in. The federal, instead of waiting for the Supreme Court to rein in these district courts, that's something that Congress should do. I think that should be one of their priorities, is rein in the federal courts, rein in the Supreme Court where it needs to be reined in, because most of their power comes, as you know, from whatever Congress gives them. They don't have a lot of inherent power, but that's
right. I completely agree. And as you probably are aware, we passed a bill a few weeks ago through the House. Now the question is getting it into law that would severely restrict the province of the federal district courts as it relates to nationwide injunctions. And so hopefully now the problem is, can we even get it to a vote in the Senate? And so that's the challenge right now. I think conservatives would all agree that we need to rein in the jurisdiction of the courts. We need to alter that. And you're exactly right. The Congress has the power to do that. We have set up and given much of this power to the Supreme Court. You mentioned Marbury versus Madison. The Supreme Court kind of seized this power for itself early in the history of the Republic, and it has become a kind of an accepted notion that they somehow uniquely control or have the province over the question of constitutionality. And that's one of those things that plays out over the long arc of history as to whether or not that stays in place. We know that our own Andrew Jackson challenged that effectively, I would add, during his presidency, where he famously said the court's now issued its opinion, let's see them enforce it. And obviously they don't have that power. And so there's a bit of political brinksmanship. And I think you see the White House and the president engaging in that. And I think, as we've seen in the past, the court understands, I think inherently, if they're doing their job, they should be listening to what the people are saying in the electoral process, and perhaps tempering the degree to which they try to assert their too much power as the Supreme Court. They know that ultimately they are subject to the political desires of the people, and through their elected representatives, including me and others in the Congress and the president, and they need to be cognizant of that, frankly. So I hope that they temper their judgments here and act accordingly with the judgments that they enter and the degree to which they try to usurp what the president is trying to accomplish.
But Trump would be justified on some of these if he said, hey, look, you don't have the authority. Article 2 of the Constitution gives me this authority, and I'm just talking kind of generically here, and this is your lane. This is my lane. I mean, he has just as much right in terms of restoring or defending the balance of power as the courts. And he takes an oath to the Constitution, not to the Supreme Court. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on that, because I think that's important. I think the philosophy that we have just accepted that the court is the final word, I think that's been one of the most damaging things in our country. But anyway, we'll get on to the governor issue. And so first question is, why do you want to be governor?
Well, so I believe that this is a critical moment for Tennessee. The challenges for the future of Tennessee, I think, are very real. And it really comes down to preserving the values and the integrity of our state as we know it, as we see the state growing. It's a different problem than we have at the federal level. Obviously, at the federal level, the question is whether we can make America great again. Can we get the country back on track? Can we get our spending under control in Washington? Can we stop some of the nonsense that we've just been talking about previously, and a whole host of other issues that we are all keenly aware as conservatives? For Tennessee, I think it's in some ways a better picture, but maybe just as very important that we get this right going forward. So we have, we're blessed to live in a state where we've had more or less good, frugal management, not perfect, but pretty good over time. And so as a result of that, we have low taxes, among the lowest taxes in the country of any state in the country. We have the lowest debt per capita of any state in the country. We have relatively, few regulations to interfere with how people live their lives. We could make improvements there, we all know. And we have a hospitable environment, a social environment. We're friendly folk. And I attribute that to our Judeo-Christian values. We follow those values in our lives. And so we treat each other well, and we play by the rules, and we generally follow the law and all that sort of thing. And so those are all good things. But we're growing dramatically, and a lot of people have figured out what we've got going on in Tennessee is good. And as we all know, folks are flocking to our state. And with that growth, I think, come challenges. Some of those challenges are just challenges to our services, to our infrastructure, and that sort of thing we could talk more about. But some of those challenges are to our very way of life, our values. These people come in. They may think they're conservative. They may be conservative, but they also bring some ideas that are foreign to the way we look at the world here in Tennessee. And so I think we've got to be very intentional about how this state continues to grow. I don't want to stop progress, but I do think we need to be very careful as we grow as a state, as we continue to attract people to our state, that we make it clear that we want to uphold the values that we hold dear in Tennessee, and that we keep Tennessee on track as it grows. So that's the overarching reason. And I think that in order to get that done, we need a governor, an executive to run our state who has proven experience. I've spent the last 7.5 years or so, or 6.5, 7, going on 7 years as a legislator. But before that, I spent all of my life really in the private sector as a farmer and a business person. And so I know what it's like to start a business from the idea level and take it through to success, building a company, creating jobs and opportunities, executing on a plan and a vision, and making that come to life and be reality, motivating people to achieve and reach the goal that has been set. And that's the job that the governor of Tennessee has. It's not a legislative job. I've learned a lot in the job that I have right now, but I will tell you that being a legislator is not the same as running an organization. And so I believe I'm in a good position, and I have the experience, the training, and the background, and the values, but most importantly, the actual executive leadership experience that I think will equip me to be successful for Tennesseans as their next governor. And so that's, I have 2 young children, Guy and Sam. You mentioned in the introduction, Guy is 7, just finished the 1st grade, and Sam is 4. And I care a great deal. My family got here in 1790. So there's a long history in my family. I'm the 8th generation. Guy and Sam are the 9th. And so I'm just hoping that we can pass this state off to that next generation, to your kids and my kids, in better condition than our parents left it to us. And so that job of being governor, I think, will be the hardest job I've ever had. I think that would be true of anyone who gets that job. And I think I have that experience that I've already talked about, and the energy and enthusiasm. And hopefully the people of Tennessee will agree, the vision to lead the state over the next many years ahead. And that's why I'm running for governor.
Well, now, you mentioned our values, keeping our values. I would say that D.C., certainly in past years, has been as big of a challenge to our values as anybody coming from other states. And that's kind of where leading up to, okay, we do have a 10th Amendment. And I think as far as fixing the country goes, I think the more the states not only stand up for their 10th Amendment, but that they demand that be not, standing up for the 10th Amendment to me is not just, well, we're going to sue the federal government. or we're going to sue them just because we don't like something. But the 10th Amendment is the only thing that can keep a state, can keep the federal government in check. And I understand it's hard for one state to do it, but as a governor, would can we expect you to be a strong 10th Amendment governor? Do you believe in the concept of nullification? That if the federal government forces something on us that's blatantly unconstitutional, whether it be the executive, whether it be the Congress, or whether it be the court, would you say, hey, look, you don't have the right? That's my question.
Absolutely. And you talked about the 10th Amendment. I would start by looking at Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers clause in the Constitution that makes it very clear and the founders made it clear in their writings that they wanted a federal government of limited power, specifically enumerated powers. They were fearful that the federal government would become the behemoth that it is today. Yes. And so they made a list, for goodness sakes. And if you haven't looked at that, I know your listeners probably more so than most Americans, most Tennesseans are aware of this, but you should look at that list, and it makes it very clear. And then they said, they thought, and I think they were right to be concerned, and obviously history proves them right to be concerned. They said, okay, we've made this list, but we're going to make it extra special clear. So in the 10th Amendment, they made it clear by saying, hey, essentially my word's not theirs. They were more eloquent than I am, but they basically said, if it ain't on the list, then these powers are preserved to the people or to the states respectively. They saw the states as the sovereign and the people as the real true sovereigns, not the federal government. They saw the federal government as a tool to be used by the states and the people to protect the rights that they felt like God had given us all, not to somehow dole out rights, but they wanted a federal government to make the colonies cohesive and allow them to be able to engage in commerce effectively with the rest of the world and to defend the republic from outside threats. And so if you look at the list of powers they gave to the federal government, they're very much focused on that. And, I say this to people a lot of times and they say, well, what would happen if the federal government quit doing all these things that are not on the list?
Let's see.
My answer is always, well, look, the states could decide to do it, and they could decide one by one. There are 50 states. There are laboratories for democracy. They could decide, hey, one state could say, we want to do it differently. That's what the founders hoped for and envisioned would happen. The rest of the states can watch what one state does and decide, hey, that's a train wreck. We don't want to go there. But that's the answer. And if you think about it, I always talk about if you think about the powers that the federal government uses today, the programs they have kind of put everything into two buckets. There's the things that the federal government's supposed to do that are listed in Article 1, Section 8. And then there's all the other stuff that the federal government's doing that, frankly, they're not supposed to be doing. And if you think about it, almost all of the problems that exist today are because the federal government is doing things that it was never meant to do to begin with. Right. And so we've got to get that back in control. To go back to your answer, I think you do need governors who are willing to stand up and fight. That doesn't mean you always win, because we all know the long arm of the federal government and the power and power of the purse are very powerful issues. And we've seen how that gets used to beat down states like Tennessee when more than half of our budget is coming one way or another from the federal government, or at least a significant part of it. And so then they essentially co-opt the states to participate or to relinquish their power to the federal government, and that has to stop.
Well, and I want to talk about that in a minute, but I want to finish up with the 10th Amendment / nullification, because the reason I bring that up is during COVID, our legislature, House and Senate, passed a resolution. I understand it's just a resolution, but this was telling the federal government, this had to do with COVID vaccinations and certain other things, that, hey, look, we are a sovereign state. Everything that we did not delegate to the federal government, we retained. And if you do X, Y, or Z, and I don't remember the specifics, it had to do with vaccinations and other things like that, we're letting you know, we're putting you on notice that we will take action, meaning, and they stated we would take legislative action, not just go to the court and beg you to stop. Okay,
Right.
we would take legislative action as we have the right and responsibility to do. Now, since that time, we've tried to get a nullification process bill passed because, hey, they already said we could do that. Now they want to act like, oh, no, we can't do nullification. They act as if it's secession. But just a few years ago, they correctly identified their right and their responsibility. So my question to you is, as a governor, if a nullification process bill were brought to you, and I don't mean that we're going to do everything overnight and that, oh, well, we don't like this, so we want to nullify it. I mean when it's clearly overreach. The marriage opinion would be a good example. Would you as governor support legislation that promoted nullification or that defended nullification? That's my question.
Yeah, I don't want to sidestep it. I mean, obviously, the devil is always in the details. But yes, the answer in a broad sense is states should be prepared, and governors that want to lead a state should be prepared to stand up to the federal government. And if nullification is required to confront overreach by the federal government, then I think you have to be prepared to look at every avenue to push back. Again, as I've already said, the federal government has this tremendous power, the power of the purse. Frankly, that's they use the power of the courts and lots of ways that they try to force the will of the federal government down on states.
Right.
But the principal way that they obtain, the compliance of states is with money.
Right.
And so you've got, and that's why I'm proud of Tennessee's General Assembly and our prior leadership that have stood in the way of like Medicaid expansion. Right. For example, where the federal government was essentially trying to bribe the state of Tennessee to do something that was not in our best interest. And thank goodness that our leaders in Tennessee initially had the will to stand up to that, and then have stayed the course there. And I hope that we don't do something in this current legislation that makes it harder for Tennessee to stay out of that, because I don't think there's a good path. Right. I don't think that ends well for the whole country. Certainly wouldn't end well for Tennessee. So back to your question, I think we've got to keep every arrow in the quiver and be prepared to use it if we have to, including nullification.
Okay. So you mentioned 50%. I knew that it was around 40%. 50% does not surprise me, and it's been that way a long time. And here's the thing. I agree that is, that's what they hold over our state to a great degree. And of course, pretty much everything they hold it over our state for is unconstitutional anyway. Okay, I mean, it's just flat out not one of their responsibilities. But I understand our state, they don't want to be left holding the bag, so to speak. But we're going to have to get, we have to do something about our state's addiction to federal money. And I know you can't do it cold turkey. You can't do it, well, unless we have a crash. I guess we'll be forced to. If we have a crash, we'll be forced to. But would you as governor, recommend or promote an initiative to reduce our dependency? I mean, if it's not important enough for our state to fund it, then do we really need to be involved with it? I mean, if it's that important.
And I probably should clarify a little there about of the state's total budget's just shy of $60 billion annually, and about half of that, a little less than half of that, comes from state funds directly, and then about 35% comes directly from the federal government, and the rest is made up with fees and tuition and things like that. So the federal component is a little more than a third of all the dollars that are spent, a little bit more if you factor everything in. But it's a lot of money. And of course, as we know, not only do we get all that money from the federal government, but they use it as leverage to direct how we spend our money,
right?
And force us to spend our money to meet compliance. And so, yes, I think you have to be willing to stand up to that. I think the refusal to do the Medicaid expansion is one example of Tennessee doing that. I think recently our Speaker of the House asked the question of should we be taking the federal education money? And while some people thought that was ridiculous, I would say that's probably a useful exercise to pursue thinking about, because what if the federal government suddenly quit sending that money? And we know when the federal government's 37 trillion in debt, and incurring $2 trillion annual deficits and $1 trillion in interest, we are just a matter of years away if we don't get the house in order, the financial house in order at the federal level, when we won't be able to depend on the federal government. If we do our jobs right here with this bill, there will be fewer federal dollars coming to states like Tennessee, as it should be, I would argue. And so we'd better be thinking about how we can be self-sufficient, and how would we run our state if we didn't have all those federal dollars coming to us.
Right. And the other aspect of that is I see our federal government financially as the Titanic. It's already hit the iceberg. We're in the lifeboats, but the lifeboats don't do you any good if they're still on the boat. So we need to get them out of the boat, cut as many ties as possible with the federal government so they can't use that leverage on us. Plus, so when that day happens, that it will be a lot less painful if we're already independent on those things. So.
Absolutely. And I would say, there are two elements to our interaction with the federal government. One is the financial, the Titanic, as you correctly stated, and compare it. But the second is just the erosion of rights and the people's independence that comes from all that federal largesse. So, at some level, the fact that we have the financial problems that we have and addressing them, and ultimately I think we'll be forced, we'll either choose to address them however clumsily we do it, or we'll be forced to address them. And that's when the people, I think, can reclaim some of their freedom and liberty. But it would be far better for all of us if we do that proactively and we choose that path. And so this is that moment again where we can start that process of getting spending under control in Washington and restoring power and responsibility to the states where it can be better handled, in my view.
And you have some ideas for within our state, because our state budget is out of control as well. We talked before, we're at like 60 billion. And we were at 38 billion just 6-7 years ago. Now we're at 60. And any thoughts about how to return that to a reasonable level?
Well, I think you've got to be very selective about how you spend money. Now, I think it's fair to note that the Biden inflation it accounts for a certain part of that. Is just those dollars don't mean as much as they used to. So you have to factor that in, 20-25% inflation. Right. That's a part of that growth in spending that, frankly, we can just lay that right at the feet of Joe Biden and the Democrats for just the insane spending. Some of it Republicans probably have to share some credit for, because we obviously got it wrong with how we addressed COVID, and we spent way too much money, and a lot of it got wasted. And so that's why, I'm a big supporter of what Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency is working on, is to try to rein some of that stuff back in. But you're right, Tennessee also has to be frugal and careful. And sometimes I think we get too far over our skis in being proud of the fact that, we have managed the state relatively well as compared to other states. And we do have low taxes and we do have low debt. But the government's constantly looking at state level, local level, ways to spend more of your and my money. And, one of the things that I think you hear politicians be guilty of all the time is they'll talk about investing, right? You hear them talk about investing. I would argue the government doesn't invest very much money, if any. It spends your money. Right. It takes your money from you that you might have invested in something productive, and it spends it for the priorities of the political rulers of the day are. And so, the truth is, we know, and I think this is one of the hallmarks of President Trump's tax cuts from 2017 that hopefully we're going to extend here and make permanent, is that the American people will put that money to far more productive uses and grow the economy. And that's true back home in Tennessee. And again, I want to salute the legislature and past leadership for doing a pretty good job, but we have seen the budget balloon. And so we have to be frugal with how we spend the taxpayers' money. And we are spending it, not investing it, in almost every case. There are probably, you could make the argument that when you build a road, that's an investment in the future, because that road can get used for years and years to come, and it will pay off in terms of economic activity and serving the people. But far too many of the things the government does is just spending your money. Absolutely.
Now, there's no way we talk about running for governor of Tennessee without talking about the Second Amendment / Section 26 of our Tennessee Constitution. So Now, I'm going to bet that you're going to tell me you're a full supporter of the Second Amendment. So go ahead and tell me you're a full supporter of the Second Amendment.
Full supporter of the Second Amendment. And I'll go a step further and say, I've been supportive of activities to advance the Second Amendment, with my own resources to help support that. Believe very strongly in the Second Amendment. And I guess I would go a step further to say, the Second Amendment often confused by people and people who try to mislead you about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was never about affording you the right to defend yourself from others. That's a side benefit, obviously, of the Second Amendment. If you're armed, you can defend yourself. But it was always, I think, in the minds of the framers of the Constitution about equipping the people to defend themselves from tyrannical government. And right. That is where I think that's the special power of our Constitution, that, you can give people protections of rights and that are God-given in the laws and the constitutions that you put in place. But if you don't give them the means to defend those rights, then those rights will be taken away and will be empty. And we see the other party, sadly, constantly wanting to strip away those rights. And I like to say, they come at a price. Our rights come at a price. We all know this. So if you think about the First Amendment, you have to hear stuff that you wish you didn't want to, you didn't have to hear. And that can be hurtful and harmful and frustrating. And but the price of that freedom for each of us is that maybe we have to hear some things we wish we didn't want to hear. But always the answer to egregious speech or harmful speech is more speech. Right. And protecting the rights of each of us to say what we want to, the rights of us to assemble and work to seek the redress of grievances, that sort of thing. But the Second Amendment right is so important, and yes, comes at a price. And sometimes it's a heavy price. And thank God my family hasn't had to pay that price. I haven't had to pay it. That some people are going to abuse, just like some people abuse the First Amendment. Some people are going to abuse the Second Amendment. Right. And it's a terrible price that some Americans have had to pay because of that. But we don't take that right away because some knuckleheads go out and abuse that right. So I believe very strongly in protecting the Second Amendment.
So let's talk.
Okay.
Go ahead. Let's talk about infringements then. And you mentioned the Democrats, and the Democrats are definitely anti-gun. But our last two governors in our Republican supermajority legislature for the last several years, they haven't been that great either. Okay, so we got Bill Lee's phony constitutional carry a few years ago, which is not really constitutional carry. And by the way, Tennessee Code annotated, and I should be able to give you the numbers by now, but hey, I'm not Richard Archie. I can't just spew this stuff out. But the bottom line is this: even though we supposedly have constitutional carry, it's still a crime in the state of Tennessee to have a gun or carry a club with the intent to go armed, which I don't know how you do it without the intent to go armed, but all the same, that's still a crime. Your permit, your handgun carry, that's a defense. That we still don't have real constitutional carry. We're prohibited from carrying long guns. You can have them in your weapon, in your vehicle, but and I have no desire to carry a long gun around, but it should be my right if I want to carry a long gun. We really can't, we do have something of a castle doctrine, and you may or may not know this, but, you can't use deadly force in the state of Tennessee to defend your property. You can only do it to defend your life or the life of somebody else. So we don't really have full-fledged constitutional carry, Second Amendment /26 rights in the state of Tennessee. And the last two governors have said they would support it, and they have not upheld what they said they were going to do. So are those things, will you champion those things if you become governor? And I will say this: I know you've been supportive of the TFA. You've been to the events. I've heard you make some speeches. You've been very generous with your donations. But this will be the most impact you can make, is if you are elected governor, if those things that I mentioned, I'm sure I may have missed one or two here or there, but if those things come to pass, are those things you'd be willing to work for as governor if you're elected?
Absolutely. And you may have been in an event last fall where I said, or late summer last year, where I said if elected governor, well, I didn't say that at that time, but I said that I fully support constitutional carry. And then in my announcement speech back on March 20th, when I announced I was running for governor, I also said that I would work to put in place constitutional carry if elected governor, and very much believe that. And I think you've done a good job of articulating the problem is that, we have this history. We could spend a lot of time talking about why it happened, but 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, for whatever reason, there came a time, I guess, when the leaders of the time, kind of got squishy on this issue.
On Section 26, they basically gave the legislature, they gave themselves the right to legislate the wearing of arms with a view to reduce crime, which I don't think that's working in Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga, anywhere. And there's a state Supreme Court case that basically said, okay, that with a view to prevent crime actually has some sort of meaning. You have to show that, you can't just arbitrarily make these rules that prohibit people, because essentially we don't have that right codified in law. We have exceptions, we have defenses, we have mitigating circumstances, but we don't actually have that right. So
I agree. So I think we've got it backwards, as you've already put, and that is that it's not the state giving you that right. The Second Amendment secures that right, is supposed to. So I think our state law is at odds with where the Second Amendment is and where it should be. And so I think we've got to get that right in Tennessee. And it's kind of regrettable that, if we compare ourselves to some states that we would consider liberal, for goodness sakes, some new states that have got this right, and yet we don't. And I think we could take some of the folks who fear this could probably draw some strength from knowing that we have liberal states in our country that actually do have constitutional carry, or something very much closer to it than we do. And so we've got to just trust that our rights are secured by the Constitution, and we shouldn't be afraid of those rights. And so we've got to get that right in Tennessee. And it's not something to be feared. In fact, I think it's something we should embrace and understand that, yes, there'll be a price at times that will be paid, and we should be vigilant about trying to, do the things that we should that would secure safety for the people of Tennessee. But ultimately, this right, I think, allows people to secure their own safety, and also, gives them the power to protect themselves from runaway government. And we should, if there's something really good that came out of COVID, I think is the warning signal to us all of how government can get carried away, how leaders can lose sight of our individual freedoms. We got that terribly wrong. Thankfully, Tennessee got a little more right than some places, but generally speaking, we got it wrong, and we've got to be sure that we remember the lessons of COVID and all of this overreach by the federal government.
And by some state governments as well. And ours was not as bad as some, but there was still overreach on the part of our state, no doubt. And
state and local government
absolutely
got it wrong.
Absolutely.
And yes, so we've got to learn from that. And I don't think we're through it all. And so I would be looking for ways, if people of Tennessee select me to be their governor, to apply the lessons that we learned in COVID. We do need to be prepared for unexpected emergencies, but we can't just trample everyone's rights because some person in high office decides this. I'm going to protect you.
Right.
And that again, that's part of the price you pay for freedom. And boy, what a payoff it is. If you think about the Second Amendment, and you think about, so we have some tragic losses of people who abuse their Second Amendment rights, and we get that. But if you look at the previous century and you think about the people who died at the hands of totalitarian governments, it absolutely eclipses the violence in our own country. And people like to point out, Americans are violent and Tennesseans are violent, but tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people died at the hands of despots
because they couldn't defend themselves.
Who could not defend themselves.
Absolutely. One thing I want to ask you, you mentioned that the governor's position, it's not a legislative position. I don't think Bill Lee or Bill Haslam or probably most of our governors ever got that message. But you're right, according to our state, Tennessee, the governor's not we don't have a strong governor. I mean, the same number of votes to pass a law or what it takes to override a governor's veto. So I think the intent probably was that the governor used his bully pulpit to try to convince, the legislature to do the right thing, or, speak up when, and do what he could do as an executive, and not a powerful executive like some states have. But one of the problems we've had with at least the last two administrations, and I'm sure it goes well beyond that, is this thing of, okay, well, I don't like this bill. So I'm going to put my thumb on the scales, and I'm going to have the Speaker in the House and the Lieutenant Governor. I'm going to have them, I want this bill killed in committee. Or I'm going to send my tax-paid staff, whether the Department of Safety or whatever, to go down there and say that I'm opposed, or that they are philosophically opposed to some legislation, instead of just providing information if asked. So my question is, you're going to let the legislators legislate? Use your bully pulpit, but are you going to let the legislature? But here's the other thing, the people are already at a disadvantage, and I think you know that, because you have the lobbyists up there 24/7. Well, grassroots, we really can't afford a lot of lobbyists. We don't have, the average person is not heard very much about or heard from in Nashville, and he can't be there every day. He or she can't be there every day. And so right now what we have is, it's what the governor wants, it's what the Speaker of the House wants, and it's what the Lieutenant Governor wants, and what the lobbyists want. So I would hope that if you're elected, would you commit to, not put your thumb on the scale? If you got a strong conviction about something, you have a bully pulpit, you make an announcement, they're going to hear it.
Right.
But you understand I know you know what I'm talking about. I know you've been around long enough to know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen a rise in the use of, you might call them lobbyists. They've got different titles for these folks in state government that essentially camp out at the legislature and advocate for positions that the administration has. And sometimes it's, they may be even off the reservation with respect to where the governor wants to be. We certainly have seen that happen. And so I think there is a role for the governor to play in setting a vision forward and creating a plan, and then, laying that out for the legislature through a budget and through other, duties that the governor should exercise. But I think you're right. We should let the people be the people, those who are influencing legislators in terms of what they do. I do think that it's important that the governor have a good working relationship with the General Assembly. And right. I've been visiting with legislators. I've committed that I'm going to stay in regular contact with them if I get elected, and certainly will do that as a candidate. And then, be sure to give them, an ear to what I would be doing if I was governor. And listen to what the needs of their districts are, and what they think should be happening. And so I agree with your concern that I don't think that the governor should be using the power of the administrative power of government to influence the legislature to do something contrary to what their constituents are wanting them to do, and sometimes that has happened in the past.
Yeah, well, they target specific bills that they don't want. Hey, I want this bill killed, and the whole thing too. The governor, like you said, it's not a legislative position. The state constitution says he can make recommendations from time to time. In my opinion, 70, 80 bills a year is not recommendations from time to time. And then, of course, legislators that don't vote for that, then, well, now the governor's mad at them, and maybe exactly. The governor's not going to support their project or whatever. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Do you have just a few more minutes? I just got a few more questions I want to ask you, and then I'll let you close with whatever. We're not in a hurry on this side, but I understand you may be on that end. So I've got a few questions from the chat, and so I've got to ask these. Okay, now this goes actually back to, I believe, this is a federal issue, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Doing something about the 10-year moratorium on state passing laws to regulate AI. Apparently that's in this current bill, that the big, beautiful bill, there is something in there that prevents states from passing laws on AI for 10 years. I think that's an issue. Were you aware of that?
I have heard that. I haven't looked at that specific provision, and this is always a I guess a tension between state and federal. So obviously the founders, when they set up the federal government, they did give the federal government province over regulation of trade, and that kind of makes sense. And so there are certainly places where we need uniformity so that the states can
interstate commerce and foreign commerce.
Exactly.
Right.
And so then the question with something like artificial intelligence is just how do you allow we want the United States to be a leader in the development of this technology and this tool, and like all tools that humans have created throughout time, some of it will be good for used for good purposes. Some purposes will probably be nefarious and evil. We do want the country to be in a leadership role there. I just had a visit today from some folks who are working on quantum computing, which is, will be a part of what makes artificial intelligence work and really gives it the kind of supercharged computing power. And so, you don't want the states to impede that. We've seen that, for example, with some of the things that California has done, and where they want to regulate, if a pig has to be in a crate or not, and then that kind of interferes with our freedom in Tennessee for farmers to grow food the way that they see fit. And so that that's always going to be there's always going to be a tension there. I'll look at that in specific to see what I think about it, but I probably would put that in the arena of interstate commerce and how we have uniformity. But I also believe very strongly, for example, I also had visitors today from the insurance industry, and we have state regulation in the insurance industry by and large. And we want to keep it that way because it's part of what makes sure that we have more reasonable insurance rates in Tennessee. And, there's some states like Michigan and Ohio where insurance rates are just outrageous.
Yeah, we don't want to be coupled with them on those type things, for sure. Yeah. What do you think about making gold and silver as legal tender in Tennessee? Is that something you would support?
Well, I think that, I probably wouldn't go quite that far. I think we should maintain cash as a means of payment. And I have legislation that would require that. Anybody who looks at a dollar bill knows that it says this is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and yet we find a lot of places that are refusing to accept cash these days. And I would tell you, I see that as a liberty question, because if you can't use your cash, if you're forced to pay with some sort of digital currency, boy, that's frightening, because we've already seen how government can use its power in that space. Probably the most notable was where Canada shut down people and wouldn't let them, wouldn't let truckers do certain things, et cetera. And so we need to keep cash as a viable payment means for people, and that's particularly true. In interestingly, it's kind of brings together an interesting coalition. I've advocated for this, and it rural areas and urban areas alike are probably where that matters the most. And so I have been an advocate for that, and I think we should continue. Now, we do need to protect the integrity of the U.S. dollar, and we saw inflation, runaway government spending, and debt is the biggest threat to our currency and to our dollar and the value of our dollar. I'm a big believer in allowing the development of digital assets and stable coins that I think will empower people to be able to make financial decisions for themselves. Though I do worry about the federal government's ability to intervene in that digital space.
But not gold and silver that we've had forever? But not gold and silver?
Well, I think you can have gold and silver, and the question is, do you want to put it in some sort of form? I'm not sure how practical that is. The truth is, we don't have enough gold and silver today to provide the means of exchange for the economy. And so that's the challenge that you get into with metals or any kind of fixed asset as the medium of exchange. So
I don't think they necessarily mean sole medium, but acceptable, usable. So, and I know they can do that because the Constitution says that we can't make anything but gold and silver as legal tender, or words to that effect.
Yeah, I mean, I would be okay with having, U.S. currency that was, that was metal denominated. I mean, I think there's no problem with that. I think having a variety of different means of payment is good for freedom and liberty.
Okay, this is somebody must have. I think they're responding to something you may have said when you started. How will he control the incoming culture with all of the businesses he wishes to invite after we build up our infrastructure? So you're going to build the infrastructure and invite the buildings. So how are you going to control the culture that comes in, I guess, is the question.
Sure. And that is a part of, and we haven't really talked about this. I think there are kind of 5 issues that stand out as the ones that you'll hear me talking about. And I will tell you that's evolving because I'm listening to Tennesseans, and each time I talk with the Tennessean, I learn some new things, and that's been true tonight. But I think education, infrastructure, access to healthcare, and I'm not talking about some new big entitlement. I'm just talking about challenges that we face as a state. Energy, access to energy, and then finally, economic and community development. Those are the 5 issues that I kind of put on my at the top of the list. And the final one, economic and community development, what I would tell you there is we obviously want to get all that other stuff right so that we can be choosy and selective about the businesses we bring to Tennessee. And I think the story there is that we've seen this mistake made in the past. We don't want to, I think your questioner is really cutting to this, and I think they're right to be concerned about it. The last thing we want to do are recruit businesses to come to our state who then arrive and turn right around and tell us, y'all aren't right. We get your values. Yeah. And, when we recruit a business to Tennessee, it should be part of the understanding. And if I was governor, I would make sure this was part of the understanding. If you don't like the values we have in Tennessee, then don't come. And if you want to be part of what we've got going on in Tennessee, come on in. We'd love to have you. But we also want to be selective about the types of jobs we recruit. I mean, we want to recruit the high value jobs. We want to have our kids trained and prepared and, to do well in those jobs. And I think Tennessee's in a good, enviable position with respect to that. We just need to be more selective going forward.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Defend the Guard issue? Are you familiar with that organization, Defend the Guard? Basically, the Guard should not be called up unless war is actually declared. Not all these, not just called up by the president to go, but actual war declared. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the idea, perhaps not it as a movement, but I do think we've seen the National Guard, frankly, called on to do too many things. And so I think that's an area, that we need to be careful about going forward. And that's the president and it's state leadership as well. We kind of expect the National Guard to do, all sorts of things when their primary purpose is to defend this country. And so, because they can be marshaled and called up on a moment's notice, it's easy to fall victim to trying to, plug them into every little emergency that happens. But I think we've seen that get out of hand. And then I think it becomes an obstacle to us being able to defend the country. That's the primary objective of the federal government, is to defend the republic. That's number one, right? I think we all ought to be able to agree about that the federal government's number one responsibility is to defend the republic. And the National Guard is a part of that. It's the state's part of that. And we don't need to be diminishing the capacity of the National Guard to step up and be available to defend the country. But it
needs to be done constitutionally, though. And I mean, let's face it, we haven't had a constitutional war since 1945. So, I mean, I think that's the rub. It's okay if you can't bother to do it right, why should we send our people overseas? So that's the idea behind it, and it's going to come up. So I'm just throwing it out there so you can kind of put that in your head and think about it a little bit.
And we've been far too flippant, I think, at the national level with committing American lives and resources to wars where the American people are not given the opportunity nor consulted in the way that they should be. We wouldn't have taken on some of the battles that we've taken on if the American people had to come along for the ride. And yet we ask the service members and National Guardsmen to put their lives on the line for things that, frankly, we don't have the consensus that we should have at the national level. And we've put a lot of that on the credit card, frankly. And that, imagine what would happen at the federal level. We're a little bit off the subtopic of being governor of Tennessee, but imagine if you ask the American people, okay, we're going to go fight this war, and here's how much it would cost, and you'll see that as a surcharge on your taxes that you pay. I imagine we get into a few less wars if that was true.
Absolutely. I want to put another bug in your head. I don't have a specific question because it would really, I don't know what you know about the topic, but the threat of the Islamist threat is alive and well. Okay, and President Trump's made some very concerning appointments. I won't go into that right now, but we can talk later. But I encourage you to be familiar with that doctrine, because it is a threat doctrine. They are not here to get along. They are not here to just be another religion in a country with multiple religions. So I'll just leave that there, and I'll see, and I've got some information for you I'll give you. But now this question is completely different, although it has to do with Tennessee. And this will be my last question, and then you can take your time talking about whatever you want to. And this has to do, and I'm going to try to reword this a little bit, but Tennessee has a proud tradition, a proud military tradition. We had one of the greatest commanders in American history, one of the greatest soldiers in American history, and that was Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was from Tennessee. But he is so maligned and falsely maligned. He used to be displayed in our Capitol. Billy, in my opinion, finagled to have him removed, and now I don't know where they stuck him, in a corner somewhere. Our military academy studied his tactics for years. And the truth about the guy, and this is true about the Confederacy, and I understand the Civil War is over, but we're constantly being beat over the head with all this woke garbage in reference to that, as if we're supposed to be ashamed of our heritage if you happen to have Confederates in your heritage, which a good chunk of people in Tennessee do, especially this portion. So Forrest, for instance, was actually a very good example of somebody who, after the war, did everything he could to promote good relations between whites and blacks. But we don't talk that, because we just want to shun it. We tear statues down. And I just hope that in your administration, that I don't know what you know about the history, about his history or the Confederate history in general, but we have a lot of sons of Confederate veterans in this state. And I think that, everybody's glad that slavery's gone, but I think it is worth actually educating ourselves on that issue, the Civil War and Reconstruction. And I'm going to tell you what, I know a lot of people may disagree. We hear the term lost cause. Our federal republic was very much damaged by the forced change of what happened at that point in time in terms of the government our founders set up. Set aside slavery. The way our government was supposed to operate. We've talked about the 10th Amendment. We've talked about state sovereignty. We've talked about all these things that are, under force, we have been greatly changed. And I think we need to understand the history, understand it and learn from it. And so I just hope that you will be, at least willing to listen to groups like the Sons of Confederate Veterans and whatnot. That's my pitch.
Well, I think we all would do well to look at history and learn from it. I think one of the magnificent things about the Republic is that, the founders built into it the ability for it to improve and advance. And I think we've seen that. And so I think this is a testament to the beauty of the creation. It will always be flawed. It's created by human beings. there's only ever been one perfect human being, and we we crucified him. And so there probably is I think that probably says it all. And I will just pause at this point and say, I'm a Christian. My faith comes first. My belief in God and the salvation that Christ earned on the cross to give to me if I will only accept Him. That comes first for me. You talk about that history. I think when we lose sight of history, and I think this is one of the sad, I think a sad chapter in American history, that we've been systematically trying to destroy history as opposed to figuring out ways to, learn from our mistakes and move forward. And certainly we, as you've already said, the ending the scourge of slavery was a major step forward for the Republic, and it's an unfortunate history that we have there. But if we forget about it, we know we're doomed to repeat it. And so we should celebrate that history and understand the flaws of the people in our past. And I'm pretty skeptical at this point when I hear talk of like building a new statue or putting up a new statue or some edifice to a particular person, because having seen what's happened in the last decade or so, I'm kind of like, why bother? Because some future generation is going to come along and tear that down and malign that person because they made this mistake or that mistake. And so I think we ought to always be cognizant of that and be careful about destroying our history and forgetting about that these humans in the past, just like us, were flawed. They made some mistakes. They got some things right. We should always be thinking about that, and seeing that remaking of, you mentioned Nathan Bedford Forrest, and understanding the process that he went through in his life and where he was at the end of his life. I think is
a great story. I mean, but yet we have, and I know you're not responsible for what the governor does, but we had them fall for the woke crowd of, oh, he was this and he was that. And this is not just about him. It's about our whole region and our whole state. Oh, well, all of this was evil, everything about it. And we don't understand our history. We don't understand the basis that our country was formed on. And good, bad, or ugly, and there's different parts of it. We need to understand that. If we don't actually understand all those issues, if we just write it off as, oh, that was slavery, we're never going to fully understand what our founders created. And at the very beginning, there were different goals. Some of them wanted a national government, others wanted a federal republic. At the end of the Civil War, we lost to a great degree our federal republic. Anyway, I know this is history. This is not so much politics, but it's just, there are a lot of people that, feel like we should we should stop just listening to the woke crowd and actually do reading some history and have our state our state should do that as well, and not just fall in line with a lot of the politically correct crowd.
And again, we saw that movement get so far out of control that they were trying to tear down statues of the founders, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And where does that end? And the answer is it doesn't end until you destroy all of your history.
And that's that's the goal, and that's what we have to be careful of. And I think they use that as a catalyst to justify those. They start with that. Well, okay, it's because of this issue. Now we can tear down Washington. We can tear down Jefferson. We can tear down whoever. So, I probably didn't word that the best way, but I think it is. I understand it's not going to be one of your top 10 campaign issues. I got it. Okay. But I probably won't have you on the show again because you probably will be very busy and might have scared you off. But I just thought I'll have you on here. I would ask you that. Yeah. And a lot of people do care about that stuff because you do have a lot of people that vote
what I would say, and I might use this as the opportunity. I ran for Congress. And I would tell you, I think I'm running for governor as a conservative outsider. And, when I first ran for Congress, a lot of people said I was a no record conservative and they were worried about what I would do. I think if you look at the voting record that I've established as a member of Congress, it's been a solid conservative voting record. And I have supported President Trump and his vision for restoring the greatness of America. And I promise you, if I'm elected governor, I will bring that same conservative mindset to the job of being governor of Tennessee. Believe strongly that the principles of conservatism are worthy of being defended and applied every day in our state government. And so that will guide me. As I've already indicated, I'm a Christian and believe in very strongly in those values, and will use them to guide me every day. But ultimately, the job of being governor is to represent the people of Tennessee. And so that's why I wanted to get in this race early, so that there's a lot of time to do things like this program tonight, to share with people what I'm thinking. Ultimately, though, to go across the state and find out what Tennesseans are thinking, because at the end of the day, it's not about what I want; it's about what you want as Tennesseans. And the job of being governor is to try to divine as best as possible what all those wants and needs and values are, and then apply them for Tennesseans in how our state is managed and run, and do so in a conservative and frugal way. And so, I would argue the job of being governor is very much like the job that I had in starting and running my own businesses, where I signed the front side of a paycheck, more than I did the backside, and building a business from the conception up to success and creating jobs, creating a vision, and then putting together a team of people and inspiring them to deliver for the business. In this case, the job would be to deliver for the state of Tennessee, knowing that I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work the hardest that I've ever worked to deliver for Tennesseans. Those are the commitments that I make. And over the next year, I'm going to be traveling around the state, and I'm going to be listening, hopefully more than I'm talking, and hearing what people are saying. And, I talked about those 5 issues. We've also talked about rights, and we talked about the Second Amendment. I talked about the First Amendment. I very strongly believe in the right to life, and I will do everything I can to defend the right of the unborn, so that they get the chance that we've all gotten to live in Tennessee and be Tennesseans. And there are other issues. There's crime in certain parts of the state where that's a real problem, and we've got to address it. Other challenges like that we want to make sure that we take care of our children that are put in bad situations where they need foster care, or we want to encourage adoption. There's a number of those kinds of issues that are beyond the scope of what we've talked about tonight, but very much are on my mind. And so I hope that Tennesseans will give me a chance to earn their vote, and I ask for their vote and support. And I also ask for their input on what they would like to see happen in Tennessee. And thank you, Dave, for having me on the program tonight and giving me a chance to visit with your listeners.
Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on. I'm just curious if you have any specific department in mind that you think really, really needs work within the state government.
I've lost the audio, so I don't know if that's my end or your end.
No, I can hear you. Hello? Can you hear me? Must be on your end. Okay.
Now you came back, so
okay.
Without me doing anything. So
okay.
Hopefully,
yeah.
I don't know what caused that.
Yeah. Is there a specific
And I lost you again now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. Maybe you can read lips. I appreciate you coming on. And you are supposed to be in Stewart County tomorrow night for the Stewart County GOP meeting, 6:30 at the Visitor Center. I understand with the situation on the vote that could change, but I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night if you're able to make it. And any of you in the audience that can make it, 6:30 tomorrow night at the Stewart County Visitor Center.
I seem to have lost the audio again.
You there?
Sorry about that.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Okay, so I guess it's on your end. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. I lost audio, so.
Okay, I appreciate you, and I hopefully see you tomorrow night. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, and we really need our subscribers to watch the show even if it's later. That really helps our numbers and help keep us on the air. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Please find and follow us on Facebook or X. Next week, we will replay our show from last Sunday featuring Art Garhart, a 4-tour Vietnam veteran with an amazing story to tell. Then the following week on June 2nd, what if the real battle begins after the battlefield? That's the title of our show. Our guest is Professor Jeffrey Adicott. He'll be sharing all about the Warrior Defense Project in the fight for military justice. He's a lawyer, and he helps these veterans who have been charged with so-called war crimes. You remember some of the crazy rules of engagement that our guys were under in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he helps defend these people that defended our country, upheld their health, and now they're being charged by their country. In many cases, these things are totally bogus. Also, don't forget this Monday is Memorial Day, and remember those that made the ultimate sacrifice and the family they left behind. Hope you'll join us again next week. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.